we have to get rich before we get old. If we don't use nearly half of our workforce, then the chances of our becoming rich before we get old are much lower. To move this discussion from a social or correction of social equity to an economic imperative, we can't. The chances of our country becoming rich before we get old, say by 2047 or 2050, necessary wealth creation, necessary capital formation, all of that is not going to happen.
What is the FLFPR for India? How does it stack versus, let's say, some Western countries and some of our peers?
So we are very badly off. The point is that it is abysmally low. 2/3 of these women are in agriculture. More than half are in unpaid work.
So which means around 7-8% of women are actually in what we would call salaried class.
Why is there only a motherhood penalty? Why is there no fatherhood penalty? That this is not something about emotion. This is a real economic reality. Safety and mobility were the two biggest concerns. Nearly 12.5 crore, so 125 million women with high school and above education are sitting at home.
Hi and welcome to another episode of Open Dialogue. Very recently, the Axis Group published a report on women and participation of women in the labor force in India. It's titled The Missing Half. It's a very appropriate title. It looks at the participation of women and it looks at it from a very economic perspective. Typically, discussions around women participation is focused around the social aspect of this. But there is a very hard economic reality which compels women's participation as one of the most important metrics of growth of the economy. And so this report looks at it from that angle. To discuss this report, I have with me Neelkanth Mishra. Neelkanth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sohit.
So Neelkanth, first to start off, if you can just talk to us about the motivation for doing this study and just what the study was. You did a very major survey and the like, so it'd be helpful to just get your sense on that.
So I about a year and a half back, maybe triggered by Claudia Goldin getting the Nobel Prize for Economics, I picked up Career and Family. And I was just blown away that it wonderfully documented how through cohorts, women's participation rates had changed. And that's when I socialized with our HR department that, look, according to me, if there is a deadline, so frankly, in 2022, we had done this report where we looked at Asian demographics, and we had found that demographic shift is much faster than economic changes. And that's the first time I started using this phrase, which is now really caught on, that we have to get rich before we get old. And when I look at it from the prism of how do we grow, so we can grow by adding more labor, adding more capital, doing more productivity, which we often discussed on our shows. If we don't use nearly half of our workforce, then the chances of our becoming rich before we get old are much lower. And when I started looking for research on female labor force participation in India, for the purpose of this episode, we can keep it as FLFPR, female labor force participation rate. So the FLFPR research in India was very basic, and I was blown away by what Claudia Goldin had done in terms of the depth of research that had happened. It took a lot longer than we expected, meaning it wasn't just secondary research, so we went really deep. So our team, Pratik, Anja in particular, I think we read like hundreds of papers on this, but we couldn't find anything useful on India. So other than lamenting the fact that India's FLFPR is low, we had no idea about why it is low, how it can be improved. And therefore, we commissioned a study. So it took a while to design the study and implement it. We surveyed 11,000 people. So our objective is to move this discussion from more, as you very rightly said, a social or correction of social equity to an economic imperative. We can't. The chances of our country becoming rich before we get old, say by 2047 or 2050, are completely dependent. I would say almost completely dependent. There are countries like Korea and Japan which have done it without really moving it meaningfully, but at our scale, it is extremely critical economically for us. So that's the rationale for why we wrote this report. And I must say that as we went about doing it, I think there were significant lessons. So now when I see debates like in our media presentation that happened at around the time of the release, one very bright and clearly passionate journalist asked, I mean, we'll discuss this, that why is there only a motherhood penalty? Why is there no fatherhood penalty? And frankly, I initially, say before writing this report, I would have dismissed her as just, this empty rhetoric is not going to solve any problems. We have to approach it with a scientific approach. So I could empathize with where she is and what she was saying. But at the same time, I could give her an intelligent answer which calmed her down, that this is not something about emotion. This is a real economic reality and this needs data and thought. And we are hoping through this report we've added that debate.
So Neelkanth, why don't we just dive in? Let's start first with just the state of, affairs right now. So what's happening? What is the FLFPR for India? How does it stack versus, let's say, some Western countries and some of our peers?
The definition of participation itself is that you want to work.
Right.
So there's unemployment rate. So unemployment rates for women are higher, but they at least want to work. So that number is about 42% in India, which is, if you look at the G20 nations, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Italy are below us. Italy was a surprise to me. They do have a very paternalistic kind of, maybe the remnants of the Roman Empire still persist. We'll get to that, I guess, later. But if you see the participation rates, India in a larger cohort as well, India is better than only countries that are predominantly Muslim, where there is a religious barrier to women joining the workforce. So we are very badly off. What makes things even worse is that nearly 2/3 of these women are in agriculture.
Of the 42.
Of the 42. And more than half are in unpaid work. So you would then question, unpaid work is effectively no work. But that's not correct. So what does happen is, suppose you are taking care of livestock in your house. It is adding to productivity and frees up the man from maybe going out and doing work. So it is work. It is economically productive work, but you're not getting any pay out of it. And even the women in non-agri work. So in non-agri work, we are like among the lowest in the world as a percentage of the population. And even in the non-agri work, 60% of and the women who get actually paid, 60% are informal contractual relationships. So there is no pension, there's no social safety, there's no guarantee that you'll have a job next month. So very, very long way to go. And if you put it in the global context, we are at the bottom of the U. So what happens is that if you plot a chart where every country is a dot and you have per capita incomes on the x-axis and female labor force participation on the y-axis. So you start with at very low income levels with working out of desperation. So
everybody has to work.
Everybody has to.
You have no choice.
You have no choice. But as prosperity improves, then some women start dropping out. Partly because out-of-home safety is still an issue, and therefore there is a certain social stigma that guy's wife is working, or that guy's mother is working, or sister is working, whatever. And and there is a clear safety issue. And plus, you also want to take care of kids because, when very poor kids actually have very poor upbringing because parents are never around because they're just busy surviving. So all of those things happen. But as, again, from a certain level, it starts to improve. I think what we would call bidirectional causality, meaning per capita incomes rise because more people are working in higher productivity jobs. And as higher productivity jobs start coming through, women start stepping in as well. Because many of the jobs are services jobs, which are more appropriate for women. So, so as economies become higher income, there are more services jobs, there are more office jobs, safer jobs, more urbanized economies. Urbanized economies, the cultural norms change much faster. They're usually safer places to work. Mobility is much better. So, so India is at the bottom of the U. So we are climbing out of it. So we have some nice charts to show that both in paid work and in non-agri work, it's in 2018, because that's where good data starts. There is a distinct improvement, but I don't think it is fast enough.
So just to get this right, so 42% of the women want to work, which means 58% actually are not even available to do some work. Of the 42, 2/3 are in agriculture. So approximately 14% is non-agriculture work. And agriculture, as you said, a lot of this is...
So it's nearly 2/3, so it is 61, 62%. So yeah, but yeah, that's a good summary.
Yeah, sure. Let's say whatever 15% are in non-agri work. And of those, half of them are in unpaid. So basically around 7-8% actually are in formal,
No, half of the agri guys are
half of the agri guys are unpaid, but the half of the formal sector guys are in informal jobs.
Yes.
So which means around 7-8% of women are actually in the more, kind of what we would call salaried class. Is about 7-8% of the...
that ratio may be higher or lower, but the point is that it is abysmally low.
It is quite low. It is quite low. And if you plotted all countries in the world on this 2x2 of, on the one axis per capita income, on the other axis women's labor participation, there are obviously very poor countries where you have no choice but everybody has to work, and hence so women participation is high. And then on the extreme, as you go towards the right, on the further right, you will find more developed economies where the per capita incomes are very high. There also you see women participation being high. And actually the per capita income may be high because the women are kind of participating. But those are more quote unquote formal and higher value added jobs. And so then you see, and in between you see women dropping out of the workforce for various reasons, including safety and the social construct and so on and so forth. And hence you see a U, and India is at the bottom of that U as we speak. The other fascinating thing that Neelkanth, you mentioned is, if you look at women participation in India, it is, it's amongst the worst, as you said. But the only countries who are worse off are places where there is almost a religious kind of an angle to say. So there is a long way. Net, short.
You know what is the most embarrassing part of it?
Yep.
When Claudia Gold in the Nobel lecture mentioned it, she included India as among places where there is a religious bar to work.
Right.
That Hindu and Muslim majority nations,
Right.
That's the embarrassing bit of where we are in the U.
Right. Understood. Let's now try to deep dive a little bit and figure out why we are here and what it takes and what does it do, by the way. So first, just in terms of the impact of this on the overall economy, how do you see that, and what does that mean?
See, the first thing is when we get to the reasons why this is so low. So there are many reasons, and of course, as we discuss, we'll flesh those out. But there's clearly a labor demand issue. So just like informal work in India for women is too high, informal work for men also is very high.
Right.
So of our total workforce, only about 20% actually have formal work. So there is clear evidence of overqualified people, like in all the ads that or the news stories we hear of masters or postgraduates applying for clerical jobs, and thousands of them for one job and all that. And there is clearly disguised unemployment. So people don't have work, but they'll call themselves farmers. And so there's clearly a labor demand problem in India. So I think, so the more you do, it sounds trite, everyone keeps talking about it, but we do need more jobs to be created. And I think that's extremely critical for women to be involved. Uh, the and if we don't do that, so remember that there is already a cohort of women who are, say, in their early 20s, who have about 30 to 40 years of very capable physical life ahead of them, physical work life ahead of them. And if we can't get them into the workforce, so the necessary wealth creation, necessary capital formation, all of that is not going to happen. So when we cross the median age of 40 sometime in 2050 or 52 or 53, because what we found in the demographics research we done in 22 is that there is a visible slowdown in economic growth once the median age crosses 40, because the real estate market slows down, the hunger for consumption starts to weaken, and people's mindset starts to change. So that gives us a 25, maybe if we are lucky, 27, 28 years period for us to become really prosperous. And if a number of women who want to work, we're just saying, or just take care of the cow or the goat, or we are not able to offer good jobs in proximity. See, this is another issue when you are trying to address female labor force participation, is that women tend to be less mobile because safety is a much bigger issue. And so the men can be, like 1,000 kilometers away, and as a family stay behind. For women, I think the jobs have to be in a closer proximity, 15, 20, 25 kilometers. There has to be easy access. In fact, that's what our survey also found, that safety and mobility were the two biggest concerns for women who wanted to work. And so that creates very different types of challenges in terms of how do we go about solving these problems. Meaning, urbanization is extremely important. Better mobility. So in fact, what we show in our report, and it's of course global data, that on certain definitions of urbanization, India's urban population is actually already larger than that of China. So it's not that, see, of the features of urbanization that matter, having a dense population wherein people can share goods and services, so productivity goes up because people start specializing. So those features already exist. But what we do not have is urban infrastructure, that can people move 10 kilometers in a short space of time in a predictable way at lower costs, so that jobs become accessible. Are we providing out-of-home safety? So as we discuss some of the issues that will emerge, the separation, or what researchers call the cult of domesticity, and the woman's place is inside the house and the man's place is outside the house, really started to emerge around the Industrial Revolution, because that's when production moved out of the house. See, earlier, most of the production used to be inside the house. Factories didn't really emerge in a big way till the Industrial Revolution. And the reason at that time men were the first to venture out, because outside home safety was a big problem. So it is only when violent incidents, rates of homicide, rates of crime plummeted. So, and we have a very nice chart, which of course is a very, if you read books like Better Angels of Our Nature, that violence in humanity has been plummeting. It is when that happened that it became safe for the women to venture out. And I must say that in large parts of India, that is still not true. So I think these are all, and the good thing about solving these problems is that these are anyway hard problems that we need to solve. That having better law and order is extremely important for businesses to get built. Having good mobility, urban infrastructure is important even for men to move around. So there was this nice tweet I read recently that they got 9 women to design a car, And so the interesting thing was that when they design car, they are solving for problems which anyway matter to men as well. And so I think this is the way we need to approach some of these challenges. And as I must emphasize, it's extremely important economically for us to solve it.
Right. Let's come to education, Neelkanth. Like, one belief is that, kind of education is a correlating factor to employment. How does that look for India for when we look at women versus men?
Okay. The good thing is that in many of the states, so we don't have graduation rates. So this is where the massive data scarcity in India, but we have enrollment ratios, gross enrollment ratios. So gross enrollment ratios in higher education, if you divide the number of women by number of men, GER is above 1 in many states. So there are more women in higher education and above, meaning that high school graduates and postgraduates, than there are men. Frankly, that is true for the US as well. That was true for the US even 100 years back. So there were always women there were more women graduates than male graduates. In India as well, we are now, so this wasn't true, I think, maybe 15, 20 years back, but today it is true for many of the states. There are some states where it is not true, but it's close to 1 now. So you've seen significant improvement. The problem is that nearly 12.5 crores, so 125 million women with high school and above education are sitting at home. So in general, that's true for men also. A lot of educated men who are not doing appropriate jobs, but because education seems to have a social status, right? So education has social and economic value. Social value is that, you got to get your girl married and, graduate hai, right? So that kind of education clearly helps no one. And that education is not even done with the perspective of wanting to work. But if you do the correlation state-wise within India and look at the education levels versus states per capita NSDP, net state domestic product, there is almost a straight line. We were blown away by this chart. So because everyone does workforce participation rates by education, and there is no correlation. The dots are all over the place. The moment you do non-agri workforce participation, you see a straight line. So the more the women were studying, because see what also happens, and this is where we have to think a bit more deeply than just take a sword and start saying equality and get more diversity and all that. When a woman gets educated, when she's invested in herself, her desire to work is stronger, because then she's much more confident that so it's a must-have. It's a necessary condition. It may not be a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary condition. So we have to solve for that. The second observation, and this holds true for the rest of the world as well, is that the marriage penalty disappears when women are educated. What I mean by marriage penalty is that when you look at the gender gap, like women's pay versus men's pay, there are 3 major components. There is the motherhood penalty, which we'll, I'm assuming, get to at some point in our conversation. There is a marriage penalty, and there is a combination of other bias. There were legal barriers, for example, for a long time. So till 1942, if you were a teacher and you got married, you had to quit. This is in the US. Till 1940, there was a famous Supreme Court case where some women sued the government, some local government, some state government, and then over the next 10 years, then states one after another removed that barrier. If you're working in a government job and you got married, you had to quit. So these legal barriers existed. There were, of course, cultural biases and all of that. So what has happened over a period of time in the US and most of the developed world is that the marriage penalty has almost collapsed. In fact, you'll see one of the charts which we were surprised by is that in the US now there is a marriage premium. So married women with the same qualifications earn more than unmarried women. There is a very interesting theory on why that happens, but not applicable currently in India. So because the chances of a woman dropping off the workforce after marriage are dependent on how much is invested in it. So to control the marriage penalty, getting more women into the educational workforce is something which is very important. And of course, there is skill development, changes in aspirations, all of that. In the US and most of the developed world, the other biases have also collapsed. So some of the legal barriers started getting removed. And so in our book report, there is a whole chapter on how through the interwar period between the two world wars, during the World War, it was transformational culturally, and post-Second World War, and then post-1970, how each of these problems have been addressed. The reason why we spend so much time studying that is that, whatever the West did, we have to do in 1/3 the time, because they became prosperous over a 150 to 200 year period. We are trying to do that in 50 to 60 years. So whatever they did over 20 years, we have to do in 6 years. And whatever they did in 60 years, we have to do in 20 years. So I think those lessons are very valuable, and maybe that's something we can discuss next.
Yeah. So you mentioned two terminologies, marriage and motherhood penalty, marriage penalty and motherhood penalty. And there is a penalty. Maybe we spend 10 minutes on just this. So as I understand, if you kind of take a certain, let's say, male of a certain qualification and a certain position, and you take a woman of the same qualification and same position, you see a pay gap. And then that pay gap you can split into three components. One component is the marriage penalty. Second component is the motherhood penalty. And the third penalty is other biases, like that. Those biases could, you said regulations. It could also just be social biases, like that people have in their minds. But you have mathematically assigned some numbers to each of these. So it'd be helpful to understand, Neelkanth, what that looks like in India. I was actually quite fascinated by the splits, etc., and how they moved. So why don't you kind of...
So unfortunately, and this is where we are also struggling for data, and which is why, in the last section of our 5th chapter, we talk about what needs to be done. And the first part there is we need more research, right? So I haven't found any useful data on what really is a gender gap in India. So we have gender gap being proxied by even researchers. And I find it embarrassing that, serious academic researchers are just looking at PLFS data and saying, oh, it is this, do some statewide research, and that gets published as an academic paper. What research is there? I mean, that's something that a student can do in like 5 hours. So I think we don't have that data very accurately in India, but it is there in the West. And I would say that, so there is a 20% kind of a gender pay gap between men and women, and this is not constant. So when they exit college, there is no gap. It widens over time. Earlier, so if you did the same charts in 1950 and 1960, you would find that post-marriage there was a big gap, but that no longer is the case. But you can distinctly see that moment the first child is born, there is a step down. And then it worsens over time. So, so there's still that 20% gap. I would say in countries like Australia, the US, maybe 90% of the gender gap is now explained by the motherhood penalty. So and the good thing is that they have the data to back it up, enough statistical rigor and all those things. So unfortunately in India we don't have. But in India we still have a visible marriage penalty also. So there are some people who have done research, and we should be thankful that such exists, though it is still a global research. So I don't know how big the sample size was, but they did find that there is a visible marriage penalty still in India. So women work and then they get married and they drop out of the workforce. It has nothing to do with, I must say, the amount of unpaid household work. Well, nothing will be. People tend to think very simplistically, and this is where cultural norms also come in. When all our biases start influencing our thinking, that you will see that on Women's Day there were people publishing reports that the value of the unpaid household work that women do is 6 to 11% of GDP. That's not solving any problem. even if you quantify it, and as if that explains everything. See, time use surveys show that about 20% of the workday, so about 289 minutes, is that correct? Yeah, I think so, about around that time, is spent by women. Yeah, 289 minutes per day is spent by women in unpaid household work. But even in Scandinavia, which is one of the most egalitarian parts of the world in terms of gender diversity or gender gap, it is 15-16%. So average, median, I would say, even the developed world is 15%. Maybe Scandinavia is slightly lower. But that is true. So that does not explain the gender gap that exists in India. So just by counting that into GDP, you're not going to solve any problem. The good thing is, and I must say, as much as we lament how badly we have done, I think the last 15 years we've solved many problems. So even in the early stages of women entering the workforce in the US, the first thing was to make a switch from career or family to career and family. So what Claudia Goldin talks about in her book is that in the first cohort she studied of women who went into college or who studied in the last decade, or maybe the first of 19th century, in the first decade of the 20th century, there were women who had good careers but they didn't have families, and there were women who had families who didn't have careers. Right, so it was career or family. It was only when electricity came and household chores could be automated, so washing machines, refrigerators, immunization. So infant mortality was still abysmally high in even in the US. And if a woman was working and the child caught an infection and became very sick, all the guilt came onto the woman. So the fact that immunization led to a collapse in infant mortality also freed them up. And so there was, of course, sanitation improvements, central heating, so a lot of those automation. And as the economy progressed, more services jobs came up. So clerical jobs, stenographer jobs. So in India, in the last 15 years, we've made tremendous progress on that front. So 85% of our houses are now pakka. Taking care of these houses requires a lot less effort. You have 97% electrification. Even in rural areas, you have 22 to 23 hours of electricity. So you can actually afford to have a refrigerator, because for 6 hours of electricity, refrigerator is useless, TV is useless. Now you have all of that. And so household automation is picking up. You have piped water going in. You have dense energy, so gas cylinders. It is not just a privilege, and people think that, it is actually how much time you spend cooking, because it's dense energy, so cooks faster. So those changes have happened. I think enrollment ratios have improved. So we are solving some of the problems, but clearly our ambition needs to be set very high. So many of the changes that happened after this first phase, the interwar period. So what happened in the US around 1934-35 was when FDR launched the New Deal. So under the Works Progress Administration, they also started creches, childcare facilities. Frankly, when they were set up, the objective was to just create jobs. Right? Because, as you know, FDR's objective was a fiscal intervention, very Keynesian intervention. But what they did was it allowed women to enter the workforce. And there were many states where creches ran from 9 to 6. So this was quite remarkable. And this experience helped the setup of the Lanham Act of 1941. So when the US entered the Second World War, and there's a nice chart in our report, we'll see that there's a dramatic increase in the number of men who entered the armed forces. So as we've discussed earlier in our shows, in 1939, I think the US was 38th largest army in the world or 18th largest. So it was like way beyond. They never thought they would be fighting wars. So then suddenly they had this mass entry into the army, and then suddenly workforce was short. So then women were brought in. It was aided by the Lanham Act that, the childcare facilities expanded dramatically. So women could actually enter the workforce. Younger women, of course, older women were entering as well. And while this reversed very quickly after 1945, so once the Second World War ended, and all these armed forces people were coming back, the US administration became worried that we will have excess of labor and that we will get into depression-like situation again. So they actually repealed the Lanham Act, effectively forced women to go back home, in a way. I mean, that was not the only reason they went back home, but that also happened. But what that episode of 3-4 years of women working in large numbers, there's a nice poster of Rosie the Riveter. There's this woman with a bandana and showing her muscles, which is actually a combination of two people. So the picture is someone else, the name is of someone else, but anyway, it became an icon of the feminist movement in the 1970s. But what that did was, while women clearly, immediately went back home, but it gave them savings. So in the post-World War household formation, the women had a bigger say. So the cultural norms changed. Daughters had seen their mothers work. So when they grew up, we thought, I can work as well. So it became part of that expectation change. And because women were working in industrial work, they were, cutting lathes. So the Rosie the Riveter, the picture is of a woman who used to work the lathe. The lathe, is the thing that, of course, but for the benefit of your audience, I'm sure you've done your TA courses. Yeah. So this is what you use to cut metal with, right? So it's not easy work. But so the fact that they could do all that changed the norms. So even the employers started thinking, women can do this. And so that accelerated the norm shift. So the effect of that started becoming visible 20 years later. But I think that 3-4 year episode was massive in terms of norms. So we have a nice pull out in our report where we emphasize the value of norms. And while on this, I know it's turned out to be a very long answer. There is this Boserup hypothesis. She wrote a book in 1970 on this, or in that book she mentioned this, that societies which use the plow versus societies which use the hoe. So basically, say rice versus wheat is the applicable thing in India. So cultures that are traditionally grown wheat, men have much higher standing, and you can see that in data. That with comparable levels of education and all that, and the areas which are more wheat growing, because when the areas that grew wheat, you had to use the plow, which required shoulder strength, which women don't have. Whereas areas that grew rice, or where hoe is used, the sowing of those seedlings, or rather I would say the saplings, is better done by women. So women's economic value is higher. And so you will find that in Eastern India, for example, many of the goddesses, so they worship goddesses, and women's stature in general is higher than what you see in North and West. So this is just proven by data. So cultural norms, even it's been a while since agriculture was a dominant force in the economy, but these norms persist, and they still have a role to play. And this is part of the reason why Korea and Japan are where they are, whereas China is not.
Great. So Neelkanth, let's come to now India, and what does it take from here? Like, I think the picture we've plotted till now is that we are actually not in a great place as far as women participation is concerned. Long way to go. We spoke about the marriage penalty, the motherhood penalty, etc. So now, if we had to get rich before we get old, and which means significantly higher women participation has to happen, what needs to change from here?
So, look, given the size of India and the fact that they're clearly slabs, so the 11,000 women that we surveyed, by design, we surveyed women who were college graduates and had at least worked once. So, part of it was, of course, somewhat selfish because at the bank, these are the women that we are likely to engage with and we want to understand them better. But the interesting thing that came out is that for these women, that transition from career or family has already become career and family. So very clearly, and we designed the questionnaire like that, working for just to get income is work, is job. But career is that where you're investing in it. So you are spending many years of your life getting educated, and it becomes part of your identity, who you are. So for 80-85% of the women that we surveyed, career and family. So some said that both are important. Some said career is more important. Some said family is more important. But it is more that it is now. So they made the transition. So career and family has already happened.
It's not an option.
It's not an option. So and it is a core part of their identity. So, and hearteningly, most say that it is possible to manage both. So it's stressful, but it can be managed. So that transition, at least for the educated cohort, has, at least in terms of expectations, and that's like 90% of the battle. For that cohort, the problem solutions are legal, meaning you allow part-time work, because one way to reduce the marriage penalty, though of course it does not go away, is to allow women to work part-time or to allow and make it a formal structure, and then through practices reduce the penalty for women who want to shift from part-time back to full-time, because when the kids are slightly older, then that can happen. And this is where I think it's important for us to mention because many of the people watching our episode will also be, because it's in English, it's on the internet, very likely that it will be a certain type of viewers will view it. There's this concept of greedy work. So greedy work is not necessarily people who do that job are greedy. It is that the job itself is greedy. It demands time. It demands commitment. Like your role as a consultant. Now, it is extremely important to be available almost 24/7. And while you may be working the same number of hours, the fact that you're available 24/7 is the reason why you get paid so much. Or investment bankers, or surgeons or lawyers, and whereas so like say a very highly qualified pharmacist, it is possible to just say, I'm going to take 3 hours off because my kid needs me right now. Can someone else stand in for me? That can happen. But those jobs get paid less. So as post 1970s, 80s, greedy jobs as a percentage of incomes have taken off. And unfortunately, when women have to optimize or families have to optimize, and this is where maybe I'll take 2 more minutes. Bipedalism, like humans working on 2 legs, and pair bonding, that is males and females bonding for life, emerged almost at the same time, about 4 million years ago. So most primates, well, some primates do, but most primates don't mate for life, but humans do. And a common explanation for that is that when we started walking erect, and that whole virtuous cycle of larger brain sizes, greater success, larger brain sizes started happening. If you're walking erect, physically, it is not possible to have a child whose head is very large. And therefore, human children are very unique in the whole, among all species, that they're born really, really premature. Because, as another book I was reading, this lady writes that, we clap when the child learns to turn. 6 months later. So imagine the how fragile this is. So when they're born, they're 25% of the adult brain size. In 1 year, they become 70%. In 5 years, they become 90%. So for the first 5 years, you need someone to take care of it. So it was because mother and father were collectively taking care of the children. Those are the children who survived. That is why pair bonding became much more common. The moment you have pair bonding, mating for life, you're trying to optimize collective output. So in the context of greedy jobs, what this means is that because having children is also important for the family, 90% of India's marriages end up in having a child. And I think from an economic perspective also, that's actually a good thing. So when the choice comes for greedy jobs, it's either both give up greedy jobs or one gives up greedy job. Because in greedy jobs, even if you take a 5-year hiatus, you're off. So that like you're off the partner track in consulting or investment banking. So this is why then, and given that women evolutionary, till 4 million years back, it was only the mother who took care of the kid. The male was generally not around. And that is still true for most species today. It ends up usually in a family that the woman takes the non-greedy job. And that actually is the motherhood penalty. So to come back to what we need to do, I think allowing for more part-time work and then part-time flowing into full-time, I think there needs to be much better legal recognition. And so law changes need to happen. Re-entry pathways. So what our survey found was that 88% of mothers take a break. So it's not just enough to give maternity leave. It is very important that we generate re-entry pathways, because most want to enter, they don't know how. So they're like, colleges are effectively employment exchanges. So sometimes, when someone asks me, I'm looking for a job, I said, well, go to college again, because that campus placement will get you hired, because otherwise it's very hard to get into. So these are problems that at least at the top level we need to solve. One level below that, I think we need to have even more legal changes. So for example, till last year, women were not allowed to work night shifts. There are still many states where women legally are not allowed to do work which requires lifting of heavy weights. So I was talking to someone who used to head a Nokia factory. This is 15 years back. And he was saying that in his factory, women were not allowed to work forklifts. Now, you don't need muscular strength to run a forklift, but legally they were not allowed to work. So, or hazardous material or alcohol production, or so these are things that if women can work in the armed forces, what is the role of the state in putting that barrier? Let her decide if it is dangerous. She will not work. So I think those legal barriers need to be removed. We need to improve safety. So law and order. So what's happening in UP, and we are observing that in our bank as well, that the number of women who are coming out to work is astonishing. Because the moment law and order changes, it is safe to venture out. And if it's safe to venture out, then you won't find work. So, and as I said, there are like 3.5 crore graduate and postgraduate women who are out of work. Who are not working. So there are lots of women who would want to work and they can. So I think those, and then one level below that, where we are talking about with the first generation which actually starts to work, we need labor-intensive jobs. And there need not be just manufacturing, because that's starting to happen. So you can see in Tamil Nadu, there are these women's hostels being built, 1 lakh women. I think given where we are, that's a big positive. But if you're thinking longer terms, these are not careers. Part of the reason the young women are hired, and they're mostly 18, 20-year-olds, is that after 4-5 years, they'll get married and they'll drop off. But that's not really a career. The good thing is that, they will have economic strength, they'll get used to working, and then maybe they'll find something to do anyway. But I also think that there can be jobs in services. like tourism is a very, so there, and this is where I think India is really falling behind. So it's not just that we don't have enough jobs for men and women in sectors which are globally dominated by women. And again, I mean, there shouldn't be any, I would say, philosophical debate about that some jobs are better done by women and some jobs are better done by men. There is specialization because of physicality. So, for example, 97% of kindergarten teachers in the US are women. Many types of healthcare, like, dentists, dental hygienists, 95% are women. So those jobs are too few in India. And it's not that we don't need them. I mean, we have so many children. We have of course, underpenetrated healthcare. There's certain types of jobs which I think can be created, so which are much better. And I would say that if we can accelerate urbanization and mobility and safety in urban areas, it will be very helpful, because the reason why cities are different from villages, though in situ urbanization, meaning that villages turning into cities in the same place, don't have that characteristic, is that cities have much better norms. So in a village, it's a very strange human behavior, right? So all of our behavior is context dependent. I don't know about you. You grew up in Mumbai, but my accent I have of Hindi changes when I go back to my hometown, because it's context dependent. And so all of our behavior is like that. And so if we can urbanize faster, I think the norm acceleration, they call norm entrepreneurs. So that change that got accelerated because of the Second World War. Of course, we don't want to get into a war and then do that. So I think rapid urbanization maybe will help accelerate the norm shift that is happening. I must say there are other ways of doing that. That reminds me, like, Haryana is an outlier.
It's a great example, actually.
Yeah, that you see that in everything. So on enrollment ratios for women, so the per capita GDP, so it's like an outlier on the downside, meaning high per capita GDP, maybe GSDP, maybe because it's close to Delhi, so Gurgaon, Faridabad are benefiting, even Palwal and all that, Hisar, but very low enrollment ratios. Again, participation ratios are much lower. But where Haryana is, I think, improving dramatically is in gender ratios at birth. So they used to be an outlier 15 years back. Now they're catching up. I mean, they're still below the average, but they're now catching up. And I think, and I've not researched it, so I will not, say too much, but I think the fascinating Haryana sportswomen have dramatically changed the social status of women. So I think some of those, like having role models, I think those are very, very important. So when Indian women won the World Cup, while everyone was celebrating, of course, it was celebrating, I was thinking how 15 years later, we are going to see women coming out, not just in cricket and sports, but all over, because it has become acceptable that, women will be playing sports and they can bring glory to the country. So those are things that I think we need to be conscious about and focus on.
Great, Neelkanth, thanks a lot for that conversation. It's a fascinating topic, obviously. And I think the angle this report takes, which is actually at some level, it is very cold. It is typically these conversations are, as you said, more around social equality, justice, etc., etc. This is a cold economic rationale, and I think very few places where what is right and what is economically good match, and hence I think it's great to have this angle as well. And just to summarize our conversation, India has a very, very long way to go when it comes to women's participation in the workforce. 42% of women are available to work. 2/3 of those are in agriculture. So that's about, let's say 15%, 15%. And less than half of those are informal jobs. And so very, kind of small population. India is at the bottom of the U curve. We discussed this in length. On the education front, though we seem to have caught up, the enrollment ratios are roughly the same. So women are getting educated, but they're not coming into the workforce. So that's one kind of set of issue. Second, there is the pay gap between men and women, which is one part of that is the marriage penalty. A big part of that seems to be the motherhood penalty, and then there are other biases and the like. And for us to move from here, many things have to change, obviously. But the big ones in your mind are first helping women, kind of bridge the marriage penalty and the motherhood penalty by having more, legally backed part-time work and pathways to come back to work and so on and so forth. So that's kind of one big area. Second big area is there still seem to be some laws and regulations which are, holding women back. The forklift example was a fantastic one. But I think as you very rightly mentioned, if, whether a job is dangerous or not, the person can decide whether they want to do that job or not. There is no reason for the state to kind of make that decision on behalf of the person, particularly when we are no longer a low per capita. There is no nobody's kind of forcing anybody to go and do some work, right? So kind of making that a little bit more rational is one area. We also spoke about role models and how role models can come and influence this and get more
Accelerate the change of norms.
And get them out to work. And the one very interesting and one positive aspect at least in the women that were surveyed in your survey is that this career or family is no longer the case. They are very clear in their minds. So the intent is there. It is now about getting the surrounding things right. And a final thing, two final things we discussed. One was around safety, which is safety in the environment, not only the workforce, but safety on the roads, in the train, whatever, right, is very critical for women to come out and work. And so having good law and order situation and having good mobility is very critical.
Absolutely.
For getting women back to work. And again, like everything else we discuss in this topic, this is anyway something we have to do. It's not like it's not just for women, right? Like, but it does help the women disproportionately.
Correct.
So that's kind of one other area. And last one is urbanization, because urban centers bring far more productivity, more specialization, more support, and more norms, better norms as well. So it's a big set of things that need to happen. But for us to economically prosper, this is almost a necessary condition.
Yes.
And that without this, it's very tough that we will move to being a high income economy. Correct. So great conversation, Neelkanth. Thank you a lot for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for listening into this episode of Open Dialogue. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. We are overwhelmed by the response that we've received and really look forward to your comments and feedback. Do like and subscribe to our channel to keep track of new episodes that are coming through. Thank you.